Hello and welcome dear students. Today we are going to discuss about economy of the Mauryan period. The establishment of a pan-Indian empire by the Maurya with various units of administration, a large standing army, vast number of bureaucracy could not have been possible without a strong material base. The description of Arthashastra, circulation of large number of punch-marked coins, presence of NBPW all indicate this. Before we discuss about the state of economy under Mauryas, let's first discuss briefly the main objectives. To understand the main features of agrarian economy and agrarian expansion during this period, explain how trade was organized and how it expanded and opened new areas of activity. Understand the nature of urban economy and how new towns and cities grew in the period. Improvements in technology that occur during this period, and finally, analyze how these developments led to significant socio-economic changes during the period under review. The period, that is the Mauryas, witnessed significant improvement in technology, which in turn led to the increase in the agrarian production and subsequently became the cause for the development of trade and commerce. Trade and commerce further accelerated the process of urbanization in India during this period. In light of these developments, this lecture will focus on the agrarian and non-agrarian sectors and impact of these sectors on other spheres of economic activity. This impact was more evident in craft production and commercial activities. Growth in these areas led to improvement in technology, increased circulation of coined money, and growth of urban centers. Another critical issue that requires our attention is the role of state in overall economic activity. As a result, we will investigate how far the government has intervened in the economy. Was this intervention beneficial or detrimental to the economy's growth? This and related questions will be addressed during the course of this lecture. So first we will be talking about material and social basis of production. The use of iron technology in the second half of the first millennium BC proved more beneficial as the agrarian economy was concerned. As a result, significant amount of food was produced. This surplus not only transformed society's material foundation, but it also gave rise to new social groups. Many of these new social groups settled in the newly formed towns. This is reflected from writings of the Greek writer Aaron, who stated that it was impossible to accurately count the cities in India. Megasthenes' description of well-organized town administration indicate a high concentration of population in these centers. Regulations for living in these towns appeared to be strict. However, excavations have failed to uncover any significant evidence of city planning during this time period, and the remains of Mauryan architecture are meager. The fact that burned bricks have been discovered in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar in large quantities suggests that many of the building structures were made of them. Megasthenes mentions wooden structures in the Mauryan capital, Patliputra. So, houses were also made of wood. Excavations in Kumrahar, that's modern Patna, uncovered structures that have been identified as pillared hall of a Mauryan palace. In terms of structures, one of the most significant finds from this time period is a large number of ring wells, which were most likely used to supply water for domestic use. The extensive use of ring wells and burnt bricks was thus a defining feature of the structural development. They imply that timber is readily available for their production. The use of burned bricks as well as finds of northern black polished ware sheds and other remains informs us about the organization and distribution of towns in India. In the Ganges, the existence of towns with the above mentioned material remains implies a significantly strong technological base. Thus, it has been emphatically argued in the writings of D.D. Kosambe and R.S. Sharma that this was provided by the widespread use of iron. It is pertinent to mention here that the Magadhan kingdom was located near the rich iron ore areas of southern Bihar and had access to important river and land routes. Various types of iron tools such as axes and possibly plowshares have been discovered during excavations. These tools must have made the task of clearing the dense forests of the eastern Ganges plains easier, as well as increased agricultural efficiency. Throughout the iron belt of South Bihar, numerous small heaps of iron slag have been discovered. Such waste material suggests that iron smelting may not have been of high quality. According to the Arthashastra, sophisticated techniques for producing various types of ironware were known. However, the use of iron did not spread from the Ganges Valley to the rest of the country. Independent evidences for its use and availability has been discovered in excavated material from both the pre-Mauryan and Mauryan period in the other parts of India. However, because the soil in the Ganges Valley is heavy and loomy, it is clear that heavy iron-tipped plows and plowshares were required to make intensive agriculture possible. The importance of iron in agriculture cannot be overstated. The Arthashastra, which advocates for the king to maintain a monopoly over certain type of mining, demonstrates that this was recognized by the state. This was possibly suggested as well due to the critical need for metals for military progress. Aside from sound technology, most expanding agrarian societies require a consistent and low-cost supply of labor for the production of food grains and other commodities. Understanding the social basis of production requires understanding how this labor is controlled and maintained. As previously stated, a new type of cultivation, namely paddy cultivation, had become important in the Middle Ganges Valley. This was labor intensive and required more than the peasant families' labor during the transplanting and harvesting seasons. During this time, this type of cultivation became popular. We also find that great stress was laid on bringing new land under cultivation. In these newly settled tracts, shortage of labor was expected, and from the Arthashastra we learn how state could make special attempts to settle the new areas. It is suggested in this context that the Shudras were settled in these areas. In any case, they constituted the majority of agricultural and other type of manual labor. New groups could be settled by relocating them from overcrowded areas or deporting them from defeated kingdoms. The latter was most likely the case with the 150,000 people deported following the Kalinga War. According to the Arthashastra, new villages can be formed by attracting foreigners to immigrate to them. Other groups such as carpenters and merchants were most likely settled in a similar fashion. The Shudra settlers were expected to receive fiscal concessions as well as cattle seed and implements. This was most likely an encouragement for them to cultivate virgin soil. Decaying or ruined settlements were similarly to be repopulated because agricultural production could only be increased with a rehabilitated settlement. In many cases, newly settled areas became part of the crown lands, also known as Sita land. They were occasionally granted to ex-village officials for cultivation. In these cases, the farmer's failure to cultivate would result in their transfer to someone else. Because these villages were on crown lands, the king and his officials obviously had tight control over them. Thus, during the Mauryan period, two major conditions, namely the use and control of raw material and manpower, enabled agrarian expansion. We will now look more closely at the material and economic expansion, particularly in the Ganges Valley, and more broadly in other parts of India under the Mauryas. Agriculture and land revenue was an important source for the state, so we will first focus on this aspect. In this section, we will discuss the general features of agrarian economy and land revenue organization. The general features of agrarian economy as they emerged during the Mauryan period were altogether different from the earlier periods. As we all know that during this period, permanent village settlements were recognized as it is mentioned in the Arthashastra as a method for expanding the agrarian economy. These agreements provided the state with a solid and stable resource in the form of land tax. This process of settlement was known as Janapada Nivasa, but the extent to which it was carried out is unknown. According to R.S. Sharma, it is reasonable to assume that the majority of the Ganges basin was brought under cultivation in this manner, with some efforts made in the outlying areas as well. As agriculture expanded, the cultivator's role became increasingly important. Megasthenes, in his account of the Indian society and its division into 7 classes, mentions the farmers as the second class, next only to the philosophers, who are mentioned as the first class, and followed by the soldiers, who are mentioned as the third class. Though his perception of Indian society's division was not entirely correct, the farmers drew his attention because they were a large class devoted to land. The cultivators were not armed according to the classical sources. Megasthenes also claims that the peasants were unarmed during the war. This appears difficult to believe given the Kalinga War and the figures quoted in Ashokan inscriptions of those killed and deported, which must have included a significant number of peasants. Some lands have already been identified as Sita or crown lands. The king's and the state's rights to possession, cultivation, mortgage, and sale were naturally superior in these areas. In fact, the Arthashastra mentions a Sita Adhyaksha who most likely oversaw the cultivation work here. These areas were almost certainly fertile and well suited to high productivity. It is difficult to determine where these state forms came from. It is possible that they originated in pre-Mauryan large estates owned by individual landowners. Slaves were also deployed in these areas to work under direct state supervision. The advanced knowledge of agricultural techniques described in depth in the Arthashastra also probably referred to these lands. Agriculture was most likely carried out privately in other areas of the Mauryan state known as Janapada territories. Gahapatis and Gramabhojikas appear frequently in the Jataka stories. These groups are said to have hired laborers on their land, demonstrating their ability to do so as land owning gentry. In contrast, the laborers are described as being in pitiful conditions and slaves are occasionally mentioned. The king could own land in both Sita and Janapada areas in his personal capacity, though direct reference to this are lacking for this time period. Though it is not possible to discuss the full complexities of the land ownership pattern for the whole of India in detail, for the Ganges Valley alone, one can suggest that different type of it existed. This naturally entailed varied system of cultivations and also different levels of agricultural development. The Arthashastra references to different types of agricultural operations supervised by officials thus refer to lands owned by either the state or king. However, a small section of the text deals with the sale of land and buildings. This suggests that individuals could own small area of cultivable land which they could cultivate themselves. The state's irrigation facility was the most important reason for the success of agriculture on state-owned lands. There were rules in place to regulate water supply for the benefit of agriculturalists. According to Megasthenes, a number of officers were employed who measured the land and inspected the sluices through which water was distributed into branch channels. The mention of an irrigation cess amounting to a fifth, fourth, or third of the produce in the Arthashastra suggested that irrigation facilities existed in other areas as well. Because this cess was only levied on irrigated land, it can be deduced that the state regulated irrigation facilities in areas where rainfall was insufficient. A consistent supply of water in these areas could ensure a normal crop yield. Pushgupta, one of Chandragupta Maurya's governors, is said to have built a dam to create a reservoir of water near Girnar in Saurashtra. Now we will be talking about trade and towns. The Magadhan Empire's non-agrarian economy revolved around two interconnected developments: the expansion of trade and commerce and the establishment of new towns and markets. The development of the agrarian economy provided the Mauryan Empire with a solid economic foundation, particularly in the Ganges Valley. However, it was the expansion of the commercial economy that allowed it to extend its resource base to other parts of the country. So in trade, we will first talk about organization of trade. During this time, trade did not emerge suddenly. It was part of a large economic change that began long before the Mauryan period. The Jataka stories frequently mention caravan traders transporting large quantities of goods to various parts of the country. Internal trade flourished thanks to the security provided by the Mauryan rule. Northwest India served as a crossroad for major trade routes to West Asia and Central Asia. Northern India's main trade routes ran along the Ganges river and the Himalayan foothills. This way, major centers such as Rajgriha in Magadha and Kosambi near present-day Prayagraj were linked. Patliputra, the Mauryan capital, was strategically located and was connected by river and road in all four directions. The northern route, which led to places like Sravasti and Kaplavastu, was linked through the city of Vaishali. This route connected Kalsi, Hazara, and eventually led up to Peshawar from Kaplavastu. Megasthenes also mentions a land route linking the northwest to Patliputra. It was linked to central India in the south and Kalinga in the southeast. This eastern route eventually led to Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka. The eastern route also continued down to the Ganges Delta to Tamralipti, which served as an exit point for the south and southeast. Moving west from Kosambi, another route led to Ujjain. This was known as Dakshan Patha and extended either further west to the coast of Gujarat or west-south across the Narmada, or it was the southern route. The overland route to western countries passed through Taxila near Islamabad. The development of communication in various parts of Indian subcontinent was a direct result of settlement expansion as it facilitated movement from one location to another. This naturally encouraged trade. Internal trade benefited greatly from improved river transport after the forests surrounding the valleys were cleared under state initiative. The state's policy, particularly under Bindusara and Ashoka, of maintaining peaceful and friendly relations with the Greeks boosted foreign trade. Trade was conducted in a variety of ways. It was linked to production methods and organization. Craft production was primarily organized along guilds or what we call Shirini lines in North India. This was also true in the pre-Mauryan period. However, we find that the number of artisan groups increased under the Mauryas, which paved for guilds organized in different towns inhabiting specific section of them. These guilds generally worked and lived together in close quarters. Craft was invariably hereditary and specialization was typically passed down from father to son. As evidenced by a number of inscriptions, these guilds grew in power during the post-Mauryan period. Megasthenes also mentioned artisans as one of the 7 castes or classes he observed in India. The well-known guilds of the time were those of various types of carpenters, potters, leather workers, textile workers, etc. The making of the northern black polished ware is a good example of craft activities during this period. It evolved into a specialized type of pottery making craft with limited availability outside the Ganges Valley. This suggests that it was a technique developed in this region of the country and was possibly dependent on a specific type of clay available here only. Merchants like artisans were organized along guild lines. Certain type of merchants were linked to specific artisan groups which facilitated the distribution of goods. They too lived in identifiable parts of cities that became associated with their professions. It's worth noting, however, that the state administration under the Mauryas also organized trade. This administrative control over production and distribution increased efficiency. This did not imply that it directly interfered with or altered guild organizations. On the other hand, it increased its control over the distribution of their goods and became a producer in its own right. On another level, it gradually transformed some crafts into small-scale industries. The state accomplished this by directly employing artisans such as shipbuilders, stone builders, and so on. They were exempted from paying tax because they performed compulsory labor for the state. Other artisans who worked for the state, such as weavers, etc., were taxed. The steps mentioned above to organize trade and commodity production were part of state policy. This policy aimed to increase its efficiency and revenue in economic spheres of activity. Megasthenes mentions a Panya Adhyaksha whose job was to set price for goods and intervene if there was a glut in any commodity. This text lists the various officials in charge of various economic activities. The Samasta Adhyaksha's office that looked after the market was actually to check the traders' unethical practices. The Pato Adhyaksha was in charge of ensuring that standard weights and measures were maintained. A Nau Adhyaksha was put in charge of state boats that facilitated transportation. He assisted in the regulation of river transport and the collection of ferry fees. Taxes and custom duties ranging from 1/5 to 1/25 of the value of goods were levied on all traders. These were supposed to be collected by a toll collector known as the Sula Adhyaksha. Whenever the state produced goods, different categories of officials were in charge of specific departments. These items were known as Rajpaniya. The state was careful to select commodity production and trade areas that were both necessary for its operation and produce a high level of revenue. Private traders could sometimes sell state goods because their distribution network was more well organized and widespread. Despite the aforementioned changes, it is reasonable to conclude that the vast majority of artisans continue to work independently or within the complex structure of guilds. Even artisans found it advantageous to join them because it eliminated the expenses of working alone or competing with others in the same profession. From the standpoint of the state, guilds facilitated tax collection. Finally, because they concentrated locally and specialized in specific crafts, that particular trade was strengthened. However, we must conclude that guilds did not flourish in all parts of India during this time period. Particularly in the extreme south, even in the post-Mauryan period, it is difficult to find mention of them. However, we all must keep in mind that India made tremendous growth in the sphere of economy during the Mauryan period, be it agriculture, be it trade, or be it any other form of economy. Dear students, it was all about today's lecture regarding economy of the Mauryan period. Hope you have understood it well. See you next time with a new topic. Till then, take care and goodbye.